Do you think Stoicism is cool and hip and trendy? Do you want to do daily Stoic habits that would make your life so much better and easier? Well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're going to be talking about why Stoicism. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Yeah, so Stoicism seems to be quite popular. And actually, I just finished listening to this book called The Antidote, which is a book on how to be happy for people who are tired of positive thinking.
Hmm.
Very interesting book by
Who
Oliver.
wrote
I
that?
think it's Oliver Berkman, the guy who wrote 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals.
Oh, okay,
But
okay.
yeah, so it comes down to a few things. It comes down to Stoicism, Buddhism, memento mori, and that's pretty much it. But
That's
it
all.
got me, yeah, I know, simple as that. Yeah. But it got me actively reading Stoicism on a regular basis again. Because I listen to meditations pretty regularly,
Yeah, great
but
book.
but doing it every day just helps remind me every day that I'm going to have these situations. So, Danny, let me
Yeah.
ask you, why Stoicism?
Why Stoicism? I will say that just a comment that you said there too. Like, I think that's a good idea reading like meditations every day. I mean, he wrote pretty much often. I mean, I think every day, more or less, right? I don't know if we have all of
Yeah.
that survived, but
He's got 12 books and
yeah,
they're pretty in depth.
that's what I mean. I think, we look back at these past thinkers, whether you're into Stoicism or any kind of philosophy or anything like that, like it could be Taoism, Buddhism, whatever. You look back and you see that they were committed to practicing these things. All of it. It wasn't just like it wasn't just a hobby of theirs. Like I go meditate, here and there or whatever when I have time. It was something they were truly committed to and believed in. And I think they were concerned with the exact same things we were concerned with, right? Having a good life, being happy, dealing with stresses, anxiety, and the world around you, just being human. So I think to answer your question, why Stoicism is, you know, again, I think like you could go to other ones as well, but Stoicism is great because it can give you answers and it can show you kind of tools and practices that can help you, kind of just live a better life and calm down and see the world differently and get perspective on things. That I think it's hard because like society tries to convince us all this stuff matters so much, and in reality, it really doesn't. And
Mhm.
by focusing on that stuff, we forget about ourselves. And so I think it's important to kind of reflect on your own life and figure out, what is right for you because you only get this one shot.
Yeah. And one thing that I always hear you saying like think rationally and stuff like that. And the Stoics were very interested in thinking rationally as well because they're like, hey, we're like a bag of flesh that's going to die. And
Pretty
the
much,
only
yeah.
thing that we have is really a rational thinking. And so how can we make the most of that and not be deceived? And so, like, part of that is just the dichotomy of control. Like, this thing smacks me upside all over the place. How literally every time I'm discontented, it's because I'm trying to control something that I have no control over.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a reason why like so many books have been written on it because it's really interesting. It's super like a super simple concept and yet surprisingly difficult for all of us. And even for the Stoics, because they had to work at it. It's not like they just wrote these things down, they were masters at it. Like they worked at their whole lives. I mean, Marcus Aurelius, I think I like meditation because it's such a good example of somebody who has these principles, but clearly is struggling to live up to them day in and day out and remember them.
Mhm.
Right? Like we've talked
Yeah.
about so many times, like when you face a problem, and it's like you have all these tools, but they're just not available when in the moment. It's like
Yep.
that's when you forget all the stuff right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, Stoicism has definitely caught on over the past few years. And I think because there's the kind of like actually, I remember the first time I ever heard about Stoicism, or at least
Oh
consciously,
yeah.
was, yeah, back Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Work Week, I think came out in like 2008 or something like that. And I guess maybe it was Seneca or something like that, where he was talking about like if you're afraid of going broke every day or every year for a few days, live in that situation. So like live on barely any money, scant fare, all this different stuff. And I don't know. I guess that's where I first heard about it. But it seemed like, oh yeah, this is really tough. Like those guys that do, but also, I mean, they do. They think about they're gonna die all the time, and like they're not
Yeah.
trying to. This is one of the things that was talking about in that book, The
I
Antidote,
mean,
where he's not
Epictetus
trying to
was a
like,
slave. Sorry, he was
yeah,
literally a slave before he became basically a Stoic sage, right? Like, I mean, so
yeah.
his life was not good by any stretch, and yet he did make it good and made it really
Oh,
important, and valuable. Yeah,
I mean, this is Epictetus was crazy because wasn't it his master who broke his leg,
yes,
and he was saying to his master, he's like, "You're going to break my leg if you keep doing that." And then he broke his leg, and he's like, "You broke my leg." And it's like, how can you say that stuff with just like, just this stoic, like, "You're gonna break my leg if you keep that up." Nope, you broke
that's
my
the
leg.
image everybody has, right? Like the stiff upper lip, like not reacting to things. And obviously, whether that happened or not accurately, but that did
Hmm.
happen, he did break his leg and he was like, but he eventually, he got to a point in his life where emperors were coming to see him. I mean, that's
Hmm.
crazy when you think about it, right? A slave. But I think
Hmm.
I did want to say, I forgot to say back to your point about rationality, like for the Stoics, they thought like eudaimonia, the flourishing life, was how the Greeks thought of like the good life, right? Like you want to achieve the flourishing life or eudaimonia. And the Stoics thought the only thing you needed to do then for that, the necessary sufficient condition, was virtue. You had to become virtuous, which means going back to rationality, basically becoming rational or being a fully rational being where reason kind of like works effectively with all other parts of your body and you are rational, right? You're in control of yourself. Going back to that dichotomy
Hmm.
of control. So I think like
Yeah.
that's a big part of it, but it's hard to do because we're people, right? There's lots of things that affect our responses to things, our reactions. We have, unconscious motivations, fears, biological mechanisms, and then society around us, and all of that kind of, you know, gets in the way of us just living our best life.
Yeah. And they also talk a lot about the nature of things, like how things unroll due to their nature, and how if we are not in accord with that, we're just not in accord with nature, which is basically living wrong. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of just this whole thing where like, if you just think about whatever problems you have, like because I listen to this stuff pretty regularly, and there's always a problem that I'm up to and I'm always like super frustrated. And then I listened to something along these lines here, and I was like, oh, wait, I'm just fighting reality. I'm fighting nature. I'm fighting the way things are. And it's just like, oh, okay, let's go back to just recognizing this is how things are.
Oh, dude, it's so funny. Every time I look at the dichotomy of control or think about it or read about it, I'm like, it is just it's so obvious and it's so funny how you can see how so many of our problems just stem from that. Like, and, from this, like, trying to make things what they aren't or being mad at things for the way they are when we had no control of that anyway. Like, whether we like it or not, like, we don't control where we're born. We don't control the year we were born in. We don't control the society and how it's structured. Like, there's so much crap out of our control. Yet, we're trying to live our own lives. And I think that's why I think Epictetus is such an interesting example because like he was a slave. That was his life. And that sucked. And like, but he dealt with it in a way that was interesting where he didn't like just blame and become a victim. He still did the best he could to live the best life he could because he realized that this was the chance he had, right? And I think that the reflection on death is an important component of that. Like, if I do keep in mind that I'm going to die, if I accept that fact, if I'm aware of it, then I just have this time here now. And so, at just that alone, I think can really get you to some clarity about what you should be doing, what matters to you. Because when you really ask that question or really reflect on it, it's like, yeah, like, should I be wasting my time doing this stuff? If like this is this is all the time I have, it's finite, and I don't know how long it is. I only know that I have now. I never know how long it's going to be in the future. I can't assume that I'm going to live to be 300. It's unlikely, right? Could die tomorrow. So like, how do I maximize using that in the best way for myself?
Hmm. Yeah, and I like that point you made about doing the best you can because no matter what is or is not in your control, you still have to do the very best you can. And that's like part of the virtue ethics of Stoicism, just like making sure that you bring your A game.
Yeah. And that helped me a lot too. Like when I was like, I remember when I was really depressed, I went back to Stoicism and existentialism actually, but like it helped me a lot because like, I was at a point where it's like having a hard time getting out of bed and stuff. And it's like, but then at a certain point, I was like, but this is all the time I have, right? Like right now. I don't know how long it is. So I started just trying to do anything. And like for a while, it was like little stuff, like getting a shower, getting up, maybe opening my computer or something, doing minimal stuff. But that led to, taking control there eventually led to a greater changes, right? And I think that's the other side of it is you just have, it's a slow process. That's why it's upsetting to see like there's so many things I see with Stoicism, like, master it and like, whatever short. It's like, dude, these guys spent their
Hmm.
whole lives and they still didn't think they mastered it, and wrote about
Hmm.
it and reflected on it constantly. So don't get your hopes up too much. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. For me, what's been helpful, because like talking about the dichotomy of control. So there's most things in the world you have no control over. And these
yeah,
are the things that we want: money, health, spouses, riches, all these different things that we want, not in our control. But there are a few things that are within our control, and usually we don't control these. So our
that's not
judgments,
what we focus on. Yeah.
yeah, our judgments, our decisions, and our actions. Those are really the only things that we control. So this is something that I've been kind of going through whenever I'm coming up in facing an obstacle, because generally the obstacle is one of these things that's not in my control. I want to have control over, and so like I look, okay, well, I can't control that thing, but I can control my decisions, my judgments, and my actions. So I take a look at all three of those, like my judgments. Okay, I'm making up this story that if I don't have this thing, it's bad, but that's not the
Right.
objective truth. That's
So how you
just
think about it,
a
right? Yeah.
judgment that I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's try changing that. And then decisions. What decisions have I or have I not made that have affected me having this thing that I want? And then actions. What am I doing or am I not doing that could affect this? And am I doing the very best that I can, like you were talking about earlier? So that way it helps kind of at least allow me to know that I'm doing what's in my control to maybe alter what's not in my control.
No, I like that because so many times in our life these things happen. Like, like look, I've had times like I can't control that I might like have an emotional response to something. But what I can do is I can control how I respond to that emotional response, how I deal with it. Do I deal with it in a healthy way or do I like lean into it and let, that dictate my actions and then do something that I probably will regret later, right? Like it's a good way to think because I think it puts into perspective like what can I actually do to live my best life and deal with things that I'm presented with, right? When I know for a fact I don't have the power to make these things just materialize or happen or make other people do things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting though, because it is very practical. And I think that's why it's caught on a lot too. It's very practically oriented, And I think it just offers us a lot of help in a very busy, chaotic world where we feel like so much is out of our control. Especially I think now, like a lot of people probably do because like, we see wars going on, or we see like the climate crisis, or we see, all these things happening around that like as an individual, I really like I as much as I want them to change, I mean like I can't make them like change right now, right? But what can I do? I could do my small part. I can, maybe try and make some changes via laws or something, contacting people. I mean, there's stuff I could do. And I think what the problem is when we focus on like the big stuff out of our control, we forget what we're actually capable of and never take any action. And that's really the problem. I think you're right. Like if people thought that way more, we'd probably be in a much better state because we'd at least be more conscious of what we're doing and like what's actually possible to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
but it's something where it's just like a daily reminder, because that's all. Because I feel like, I mean, maybe it's not that our default is to go that way, but we have the habit, or at least I have the habit of going that way, where I want to control these things that are not in my control,
Yeah,
and
of
it's
course.
just like a bad habit. Yeah.
Well, part of it too is it is like a bad habit. It's also, I think, a way to like make ourselves feel better sometimes. Like you don't get a job, so you blame not yourself for like maybe what you did, or you don't look at like what you're capable of. You blame like, the situation or circumstances, the other person, whatever. Like it's a way to protect ourselves. But the reality is like you can't control the decisions they make anyway. The best you can do is prepare your best, do the best you can, and what happens, happens, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
this is the hard part because it also means, a lot of stoicism is acceptance. It's accepting things for the way they
Mm-hmm.
are and then just doing what you can in the world.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it goes a little bit counter to the capitalist society of
A little.
America, a little bit, because it's like capitalism makes, or at least it seems like it makes you want to believe that like the only reason you're not a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates is because you didn't grind hard enough.
Oh yeah, they,
But
they
it's
it
like,
loves to make you think it's meritorious, right? Like based totally
yeah,
on your merit. Yeah, when it's
mhm,
not.
yeah, yeah. It could be completely just, just by chance. But yeah.
I heard there was a great anecdote. I don't remember who said this or where I read it, but the guy was talking about stoicism, and he's like, "Look, like I might love snowboarding." He's like, and I do love snowboarding. And he's like, I might wish that I was a professional snowboarder. He's like, but the reality is, he's like, I grew up in the South where it was warm. There was no mountains. He's like, unfortunately, that's just how the dice fell. Like, if I grew up in Colorado, yeah, maybe I would have started snowboarding when I was like really young and I would have had the opportunity to do it all the time, but I didn't. So all I can do now is enjoy it. I'm not going to be a professional. I didn't have that leg up because that was the circumstances I faced, right? That was the circumstance of my life. And like realizing that, like, look, it's not my fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just how the dice fell like that. I happen to be here, and therefore, geographically, as a kid, it's not possible that I'm going to do this thing. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
but we so often like to make things out as if they were directed against us, or as if it was meant to stymie us or get in our way. And I think that's the other problem. And I think that Stoicism addresses is that makes us not act rather than take action to improve our situation as best we can.
Hmm. And also, what I like about Stoicism is independent of the external circumstances of your life, you can still live a good life.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all the good life is for Stoicism is being a good person. It's that virtue, developing virtue.
Hmm.
So anybody, and that's the one thing I do like about them is like you look at other ancients like Aristotle. Aristotle, his flourishing life was a little bit more exclusive because you had to have other stuff. Like he did think you needed wealth and things like that. Whereas the Stoics thought, no, all you need to do is be a good person. Anybody can do that. Therefore, even a slave like Epictetus, right? Anybody has that potential. And so therefore anyone can live a good life and a flourishing life. And it doesn't matter about all these external things like money and stuff because they can obviously be helpful tools, but they're not valuable in themselves and they're not a means to that end, a good life.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yep. So there, answered nicest succinctly.
Yeah.
Why
Why
Stoicism?
stoicism?
Yeah. Now
Check
you
it out.
now you know. Yeah. Now you know. So if you did enjoy that episode, like, share, subscribe. Check us out later in the week. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.